Today's Height Strong episode is a special one and a first for the show. I'm joined by Hilary and her daughter Alexis, who trained independently but kept each other motivated for one of the world's greatest adventures, and that was summiting Mount Kilimanjaro. Now, what began with an email which read, "My daughter and I are signed up for the Western Approach, and we'd love to work with you so we can summit successfully," turned into months of training, teamwork, and a story full of preparation, humor, and shared discovery. This conversation was packed with so much insight and inspiration that I decided to split it up into two parts. In part one, we talk about how they decided to take on Kilimanjaro, what it was like to train for the climb while balancing graduation, work, and life, and how their personalized programs built confidence before they ever set foot on the mountain. And in part two, we'll dive into the peak phase training, the milestone challenges that showed that they were ready, and what it felt like to finally stand on the summit, plus the lessons that stuck with them long after coming home. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Hilary, who was 62, and Alexis, who was 22 at the time of their successful summit. Months and months ago, I got an email from a woman named Hilary who wrote, "My daughter and I are signed up for the Kilimanjaro Western Approach and would love to work with you so that we can summit successfully." So today's episode is a fun one. I'm joined by Hilary and her daughter Alexis, and they both recently summited Mount Kilimanjaro successfully, or we wouldn't be doing this, would we? So Hilary first reached out to me well before the trip to start training and later introduced me to Alexis, who jumped in right after finishing her last semester at Vanderbilt. And from there, I built a program that fit both of their schedules, balancing graduation, travel, and life, all leading up to one of the biggest adventures of their lives. So in this conversation, we'll talk about what it's really like to prepare for Kilimanjaro as mother and daughter team, how they trained, what they learned about each other and themselves, and what surprised them most on the mountain. Before we proceed, I do want to express my condolences to Alexis and your Vanderbilt Commodores after the Crimson Tide avenged the loss from last year. Just want to be sure we're still friends after that.
We'll come back.
We still call. Okay. All right. There's always next year, right?
Always.
Yeah. And another kind of unrelated question to Alexis. Do you consider Vanderbilt the Harvard of the South, or is Harvard the Vanderbilt of the North?
I think that Harvard is certainly the Vanderbilt of the North, but I think that Vanderbilt's really in a league of its own. There's nothing that compares.
Okay, fair enough. I would expect to hear that from you. The proper alum comment. All righty, so let's continue. So Hilary, when and why did you decide to sign up for Kilimanjaro, and did you think Alexis would have an interest in going?
It's a great question. I've been interested in climbing Mount Kilimanjaro for years, and it just felt like one of those things that needed to be done. And so it was on my bucket list for many, many years. And I explored how to do it, where to do it, companies to go with. And probably 4 years ago, I asked Alexis if she wanted to ever consider doing something like that with me, because I just thought maybe she might be interested. She has two brothers. I asked them too, but she was the one who said, yeah, one day. And then that one day came and she brought it back up again. She came back around to it.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay. I did not expect that. I was thinking it would be a really fun question to ask you, when your mom kind of first asked you about it, how did you feel?
Mm-hmm.
But apparently you were wise at a young age and knew that it would be an exciting adventure. And then you brought it up again. So, all right, I did not know that.
Yeah.
What was it that you were excited about? Why did you want to do it?
I think that, I remember when my mom first mentioned it to me, and I thought it sounded like something really cool. And I was really honestly impressed that she was so excited about it. And so I think that immediately made me pretty excited about it. But I kind of first imagined it as something that was a little bit more of a lofty goal. It's kind of like I couldn't even visualize myself doing it, let alone visualize us doing it together. I didn't know what the mountain was going to look like. I'd been hiking before, but I think that my mom would agree that we've never done anything nearly as adventurous as this. But I know that I think that's something that Mom and I are pretty similar in that we both really enjoy working towards a long-term goal. And whether that be like from a physical training standpoint or more just kind of having ideas of things that we'd like to accomplish in the not far future, but using a goal as a benchmark to work towards something and feel that motivation, and then also just the gratifying sense of accomplishment when you are able to really put all of your effort into doing something, and then the feeling of accomplishing it. And so I think that as soon as I was looking towards kind of life after college and knowing that about myself and my mom as well, I felt like it was kind of a really nice way to embrace that drivenness of both of us in kind of a new format.
That's cool. Well, that actually explains something we'll talk about later. A feeling I got early about the trajectory of your success, despite not having all the information on the chart that I would have liked to have had, which we're going to get into because you're busy traveling and all that kind of stuff. So you guys from the very beginning were determined. I didn't realize that you both responded well to, I guess, adversity and overcoming challenging things. So that actually kind of makes sense. Hilary, any thoughts on that?
No, I think that Alexis is right. And I think that in our own way, this challenge was just there for the taking. And it was something that neither of us really even knew much about, honestly. Now that I've done it, I had no idea what we were getting into. But I'm really glad that I found you. And, it was a life-changing experience in many ways.
Okay. All right. Well, perfect segue, because we are going to get into a lot about training, but I wanted to ask, and either one of you can answer first, but before the memory fades, what is something you always want to remember about your experience that you want to share?
Yeah.
That's a heavy one right there.
That's a heavy one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm hitting you right. I wanted to hit you with that. Then we'll get into training and then we'll talk more about Kili.
I mean, yeah, that gets right to the meat of it, I guess.
And warm up. Let's go.
Right off of the top of my head, I think that this is something that my mom and I talked a lot about during the whole adventure. And I think that the obvious answer is, of course, getting to the top of it and the feeling of kind of surrealness of, wow, I'm actually here. This is actually happening. This is something that I've talked about for so long. This is something that I've hoped for so long, and something that I've, of course, as any natural person would, experienced a lot of anxiety and unsureness about whether I would ever get here. And so I think that that's kind of course, the number one answer that I think of immediately, but I think that something that's a little bit more of a throughout the journey experience was that my mom and I think I can speak for you as well on this, that we really deeply enjoyed the disconnectedness of the whole experience. There's one moment in particular that really reminds me of this, is that throughout the whole trek, there is, of course, very little connection to kind of the outside world apart from the immediate group that you're with, other than kind of the people that you might pass on the trail. So obviously there's no a cell phone service, there's no connecting, even just getting like the daily news that I feel like we're so used to being constantly in touch with. And there was something that was really serene about having the experience be entirely uninterrupted. And you're really 100% there with the people that you're with. Like when you're sitting down at dinner and you're kind of discussing how high Mount Everest is, for one thing, you can't take out your phone and Google it. You just kind of speculate and toss around ideas. And that's kind of part of the fun of it, is you get to experience life without the immediate answers to things or constantly being updated on everything else that's going around miles away. And I remember there was once where we actually did be able to kind of get in contact with my brothers or my dad, just to kind of say, hey, turns out like we're just fine. We don't really think that we'll be able to contact you much after this, but just in this moment that we did, we want to just send a check-in. And I remember being in the tent that night, my mom and I were having a conversation about it. And I was like, I'm happy that they know that we're okay. And I'm happy that everyone's updated on that we're having a great time. I actually liked the disconnectingness, and I want to go back to that because it was something that really allowed you to be fully present in a way that I don't think we really get to experience much with kind of the nature of interconnectedness in today's world.
Hilary, I'll have you jump in a second, but that's very poignant. I have a 22-year-old as well. He'll be 22 soon. And you guys pretty much grew up with, I guess, half your life, more than half your life, maybe 2/3, like with cell phones. And I don't know. I like that you, and I hope more kids later on get the opportunity to really disconnect. I think some people will never be able to. And you were lucky you were able to do that. And now that you have that contrast, you have an incentive at some point, probably in your life, to disconnect because you know what it feels like. So anyway, all right, well, that's cool. Hilary?
I just, hearing you say that, I was actually thinking the exact same thing you just said, Marcus, about your own child. I was thinking, gosh, I remember what it was like to not be connected, but you have no memory of that. And I think the fact that you know you not only can do it, but that it's enjoyable is something to really hold on to and remember. And for me, the memory, I think it's the exhilaration of feeling that, I know it sounds really cheesy and corny, but truly the journey was just as incredible as reaching the summit. And our guides kept us right in the moment every single day, which is, I think, why I was able to appreciate the journey and not be so focused on the goal. So every day was kind of a huge accomplishment. And I think for me, bringing that back into my life, bringing that sense of calm that Lexi's talking about from not being so connected. At the same time, it's like calm exhilaration. That's just like two words that don't really go together, but that's, I think, what I experienced there.
That's great. All right. I hope that people listening to this will kind of, think about that as words of wisdom and think of, it usually takes about 3 days. There's something called the 3-day effect. Find a trip out in the wilderness or something like what the two of you did and get out there and disconnect for 3 days. It takes about 3 days to do so. Hilary, we started about 9 weeks before Alexis. And Alexis, you were training for a half marathon that you recently completed, and you were also wrapping up graduating from Vanderbilt. So congrats on the half marathon finish. Any thoughts on that? I mean, that's pretty cool.
So I finished the half marathon in October of 2024. And then I think that even just that, the training for it and having that day, and I would say the whole experience of that was kind of a miniature version of a lot of what I experienced when I was doing kind of the training and then the actual experience of the trek. And so I think that having that experience and have it be such a positive experience and something that I was never a big runner. I mean, I was an active person, but I would call myself not a long distance runner. And then I think that I'm not entirely sure actually what spurred the interest in doing it, but I think that I had seen loads of people around me do it and it felt like something that I would really enjoy. And actually at the time when I started training, I was in a study abroad program. And so I felt like it was a great way for me to experience the city I was in, was to kind of start running. And I think that the experience of training for something for so long and then having that actual event, enjoyment of that event, and then also the pride that you feel kind of in the aftermath of knowing that you can accomplish something that you never thought possible before is definitely a driving factor in why I thought that Kilimanjaro and the training for it and the anticipation of it and then the experience of it and then the feeling in the aftermath of that was something that I hoped would be similar, if not kind of on an even higher degree.
Yeah. Hilary, there were a few things that stood out in your client history that I was unsure how you would respond to the training until we got started. So one of the things was the ACL reconstruction from when you were 30. And I don't recall that the knee being a significant obstacle during your training. Any comments on that?
So I will. My knee, it's really strange. And I'm not just saying this because I'm on your podcast, but ever since Kilimanjaro, my knee has actually been in really good shape. And before that, I do have a lot of arthritis in my knee from that. It was a long time ago skiing accident. I credit the training program that you put together with the elevation, the steps, and the lunges being crucial for me to be able to not have any knee pain going up the mountain. And I also wore one of those things that keeps your patella tendon in place. I don't know what they're called. But anyway, that's kind of my problem.
Knee sleeve of some kind.
Yeah, it's not really a sleeve. It's a little band. But at any rate, that helps it stay in place. But the strength, I was really fortunate because I was extreme. Part of the reason why I called you is because I was very worried about my knee and very worried about being able to go up and especially down the mountain. And I have to say, it's like I never had a knee problem now.
Really?
Yeah. I think
Hallelujah.
I've strengthened the muscles more than they'd ever been strengthened before out of pure fear.
Well, I guess I'm not really surprised. One thing about hiking training, it's a very, I don't know, some people like the word functional, some don't. I think it's easy for people to understand. It's very functional. It's the movements replicate kind of daily life and you're moving your knee kind of in a natural way. Because in hiking, all you're doing is pretty much walking, climbing, going up things, coming down things. And apparently your knee really responded well to that.
I think the key was when you started to talk to me at the beginning about lunge progression and balance progression, I really had no idea what you were talking about. But as I got further into it and understood, it is exactly what you said, lunge progression. I was from day one, I started with baby steps and progressed over, I don't know how long, 3 months or 4 months, as we worked together for a long time, progressing and building those muscles stronger and stronger and stronger. So I think that truly was the key, was your ability to kind of feed me in baby steps and then work me to a place where I'm still really strong.
That's great news. Well, that's a good surprise. I'm glad to hear that. I wanted to kind of segue into the fact that I always emphasize the importance of stair training, but I don't think that I pushed you really in the first phase of training with stairs, as I wanted to see how you would handle the other activities first. And then you did introduce the stairs in the peak phase, which was about really after 9 weeks of training. I guess looking back, that was kind of the right decision. Maybe your knee would not have responded properly, but you had been doing the treadmill and I guess hikes and walks, the lunges and the balance. And then that, I guess, helped you provide the kind of the strength to start incorporating stairs, perhaps?
I think you're absolutely right. I remember having a conversation, Alexis, with you about the stairs, encouraging you, saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe the stairs is really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think we'll end up segueing, I think, back into discussing stairs. But we're going to chronicle most of your training weeks leading up to your departure. So let's kind of start in week 1 of your base training plan. So Hilary, this is for you, of course.
Yeah.
In week 1, you replied back to an email I had sent indicating that you did not get enough elevation gain in. So I knew that you were really mindful of your goals already in week 1. Kind of right from the start, you were aware of your goals as an important component. And I'm just wondering if you feel the distance and elevation gain goals assigned each week were really helpful. And if so, why?
So I do think they're very helpful. And I'm also glad that I started the base training. Is that what you call it? Before you do the peak training?
Yeah.
I think they're really helpful. And I think it's one of the reasons why I think the base training is important is because it's really hard to wrap your head around how am I going to get to these goals? And I didn't really know what it meant to walk up 1,000 feet. I knew I live on a big hill and I thought, I'll just walk up and down that a few times. It'll be fine. Well, turns out it's not as big as I thought it was. And it took a lot of times walking up and down, and that was time consuming. And I don't own a treadmill, so I had to figure out where to go get on the treadmill, and I figured that out. So for me, it was a little bit of putting the pieces in place to try to figure out how to actually get the elevation in the most efficient way possible and in a way that was enjoyable and fun. So I do think having those elevation goals are critical. And I think that it also takes a while to understand your methodology with the average elevation that, some weeks you can do it and some weeks you can't, but you have to make sure that your running average is a certain number. And again, looking back now, I appreciate that. I didn't truly understand it before, but I did know that going uphill was going to be important. So I just bought into it. But it was hard to figure out how to get the elevation. That was what was hard for me.
Yeah, I think that's the key. I think elevation gain is the biggest predictor of success, particularly for Kilimanjaro.
Yeah.
And when people think elevation gain, particularly experienced hikers, they're going to immediately think of hiking. And then those who aren't familiar with elevation training, they might not even understand what I'm talking about. But what I have figured out over the years is that there are really 6 components to elevation gain training. Now, you didn't need to do all of them, but you can hike and walk, you can do stairs, you can do step ups, you can do treadmill, you can do hill repeats, and you can do stairs. I think those are all 6. And so I think you did about 3 of those. I think you did primarily treadmill, stairs, and kind of just the elevation you got in your hikes and walks. But Alexis, I'll ask you the same question later. So this for Hilary. I know that you are not used to this kind of hike-centric approach to training, where you focused on activities that emphasized elevation gain and weekly goals to strive for. How did this type of training contrast with how you were trained in the past? And if you have any thoughts on it.
Yeah. So I think the first contrast was having a specific goal that I needed to do every week. And that was very helpful because I either did it or I didn't. And if I didn't do it, then I knew that was going to set me back. And if I did do it, I just felt like a huge step in the right direction. So it was, as Lexi said at the beginning, when she was talking about it was a long ramp up to the actual hike. but the little goals all along the way felt like a sense of accomplishment in and of themselves. Overlaying that on my existing training was, I work out a lot. I work out 3 days a week with the same group I've been working out with for a long time, lots of strength training. I take lots of long walks. I used to run back before my knee. But now my knee, maybe I can go run now. But, I used to run too, but not necessarily with goals in mind. Maybe training for a 5K, but nothing like Kilimanjaro. So, it was a different way of training for me, and it was really helpful. That's why I called you in the first place, because I needed the structure. Well, I didn't know how badly I needed the structure, but I knew that I needed the structure, but I also needed to know how training for elevation gain and hiking at this level was different from what I normally do. And it's very different. And yet I would also say that it's something that everyone should do because, as you said, it's functional.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. All right. We're going to segue into week 3 where we reviewed your lunge progression. So going back to what you were talking about earlier, now you mentioned in your client profile that the lunges bothered your knees, and that was obviously, prior to working with me.
Yep.
We discovered that if you hinge more at your hips and you kind of lean your torso over your thigh when you're doing your walking lunges, that your knees responded fine.
Still do that today. I still do. That's part of my workout now, 3 days a week. And I do it exactly like you taught me to do it. I've never been able, I can hold weights. I can do anything. It's pretty incredible. So thank you.
Yeah. So we're trying to emphasize more. If the knee's an issue, we try to emphasize more the muscles in the hip joint.
Yeah.
And so when you lean forward, you're kind of emphasizing the glute more. It takes some stress off the knee. So good. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm glad it worked, of course. So Easter Sunday, leading up to Easter Sunday, fell between weeks 4 and week 5.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe you were on a beach holiday beforehand. That might have been Turks and Caicos or something.
Oh, yes. I was with my son. Yeah.
Okay. And so kind of this marked the start of various life diversions that complicated my assessment of the training trajectory. There were some weeks without training data.
It's crazy.
As a result, I had to make inferences about how you were progressing, and we'll get to more on that later. Right. So in week 6 of the 8-week base period, you paused tracking on the chart. And at that time, you had averaged 9.8 miles per week and 2,136 feet of elevation. You completed a total of 64 miles and 13,117 feet on elevation gain. You performed 10 balance workouts and 7 lunge workouts, and you were steadily increasing your reps. I don't know. I just want to kind of cap the base period and just see if you have any recollection about, I guess more so moving from base training to kind of a peak training mindset. I don't know if you felt there was a difference.
Well, there was a difference, but I didn't experience it right away. That time also was a very busy time, the May month, just in our lives. We had Alexis graduating from college. I have another son. He also graduated from college. We just had a lot going on. So the training, I think my mind was still in base and the time was switching over to peak. So I think it was a little bit of a slow roll for me. And then I think once life slowed down a little bit, I was able to focus and say, okay, wow. I sort of remember having a conversation with you, like we have 8 weeks or 7 weeks or at some number of weeks. This is what we have to do.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we'll segue into that. So week 8, lots of graduation parties.
Yeah.
Alexis had not started the hiking specific training at this point. But before we begin discussing your training journey, Alexis, I'm curious what your friends thought about you climbing Kilimanjaro.
I distinctly remember that when I first started training, I was very hesitant to share that with people just because I was already kind of feeling like I had a lot of pressure on myself or felt like it was something that I felt was a very large challenge for me to attempt. And I think with that, I felt like if I shared it with anybody, it felt like it was going to kind of put additional pressure on myself just from external sources. And I didn't need that because I already was really, really trying to do my best to keep my own expectations in check. I guess that's how I would put it. I think that my friends that I did share that with were quite shocked just because like I said, I've never really had a whole lot of kind of hiking experience. They knew that I was an active person, but I think that when you share that with anybody, kind of similarly to how I couldn't visualize myself doing it, they also couldn't necessarily visualize me doing it. So I think that they were reasonably surprised.
So as I asked your mom earlier, I know you were not used to this hike-centric approach to training. How did this type of conditioning contrast to how you trained in the past?
I think that, well, okay, so I would say it was similar to my mom in the sense that I was probably kind of trying to get myself to be active 2 to 4, I would say, ranging times a week. But it was kind of a little bit more of the just staying in shape, more just wanting to, like you said, maybe like try to work in 3 to 4 miles during the week or doing a strength training day sprinkled in there, especially after kind of my half marathon. It kind of dwindled down a little bit, I would say, just in recovery from that. And then life gets busy. And so I think that one thing that I wasn't necessarily used to, that was something that I had to get used to, was that with the exercises that you're doing with kind of hike training, there is an inherent amount of time that you're kind of going to have to put into it, in the sense that in my typical daily, weekly routine, I guess you could say that my kind of periods of exercise were between, I would say, 45 minutes to an hour and a half. An hour and a half at probably the absolute longest. And that was kind of also, I would say, I guess more towards the end of the half marathon training, there were definitely longer running sessions, but that was still kind of applicable there. Versus when you're doing this hike training, even if you're doing something that's more on the treadmill or stairs, you're going to have to kind of, the sessions, I would say, are going to range more from maybe an hour at the shortest to 2, I would say, just on average. That's how long they're going to take to really get the mileage or the elevation that you're looking for. And so I would say the biggest change for me wasn't necessarily the type of exercising that I was doing. I wasn't necessarily doing stairs all the time, but even just like walking on a treadmill on an incline or the lunges or anything like that, I would say that I was doing similar things, but I wasn't necessarily used to having to, even if it's just like a logistical fact of making time in your schedule, to work in 1.5 to 2 hour sessions into your not even weekly, daily. It was more so daily routines.
Yeah. Okay. So let me, a little caveat to that, kind of the listeners understand kind of your situation. So generally speaking, when someone does this hike-centric type training, it's usually it's under an hour a week. And then on weekends, it can get to be more than an hour. I think what you're referencing, which we're going to talk about, were the milestone challenges, which take a long time. Okay. We're going to get into that. And I think looking back at your chart, I think because you were just busy. So what happened is, to get your elevation gain for the week, you'd have to really consolidate a lot of time, because you could only do it like maybe 2 to 3 times a week. Yeah. Whereas some people are able to spread their training out, over 4 or 5, even six days a week. So anyway, I think that's good. I think you bring up the contrast. I think a good point on that is, hey, you've got your weekly goals and you approached it differently than some other people. Some other people who had the luxury of time would spread it out, and you just had to consolidate, just a few times a week and knock it out. So I'm glad you shared that. That way I can provide that kind of contrast. So in week 3, Hilary, you knocked out a solid 3,000 foot milestone challenge. So here we are now talking about these, which are unique to the peak phase. So you did 2,000 feet on the treadmill and you did 1,000 feet on the stair stepper machine. I believe that was your first milestone challenge event. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on that? You're shaking your head like you kind of remember.
I remember it. Yeah.
Remember that?
I do.
Yeah. I mean, that was probably a long training event for you. And I don't know, any thoughts on your first milestone challenge?
I was just really proud of myself for doing it. I do remember feeling like, wow, I did that. And it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be in terms of being sore, being out of breath, wow, that wasn't as bad as I imagined. Like I did that and I'm not dying, That's how I felt.
Okay. All right, cool. All right, we'll segue into week 4 and more reference to Hilary. So I knew you were going away for a 2-week bike trip in Europe. And I observed a deficit in your first 2 weeks of the peak plan. You averaged an elevation gain of 2,400, which was about 1,200 feet behind your target. So I remember pushing you during weeks 3 and weeks 4. And like really pushing you to exceed 5,000 feet of elevation gain using the treadmill, the stairs, and the stair climber machine. And you nailed it both weeks. Then you left for your trip with a trending average of 3,800.
Right.
Instead of going into that at 2,400. And that put you at about 200 feet above your goal. So I was relieved about that. Okay. And you really would not have known about my concern on that, but you rose to the occasion and you knocked it out in those 2 weeks before you left.
I didn't know you were concerned, but I'm glad you didn't tell me.
I never tell anybody. No one ever knows. I have a way of pushing without you knowing my concerns. You don't start to feel anxious.
Yeah, that's good because I would have felt very anxious had you shared that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So something else for Hilary, and we'll get to you, Alexis. I noted that when you came back from your European bike trip, it would be like week 7, okay, and close to your departure date. So I pushed you to knock out a 4,000-foot elevation gain challenge. And I knew it was an important predictor of success and didn't know if you can complete it. I just didn't know. I just wanted to push you there. But we'll come back to that. And Alexis, you hit your first milestone challenge in now week 4. Mm-hmm. And you did 3,000 feet. You did 2,000 feet on the treadmill and 1,000 feet on the stepper machine. I think I got that right.
Yes.
Okay. And any thoughts on that?
I think similar to my mom in the sense that I was like, oh, wow, like I just did that. I'm like really impressed with myself. And then also I would say I shared in the feeling that after completing that and obviously kind of having, I was winded, but it definitely was something like, oh, wow, I can do that. And I think I'll be sore tomorrow, but I think that I could do that again. Maybe not the next day, but I could definitely do it again. And so I would say after that, I had a similar feeling of accomplishment and also optimism going into the rest of the training.
Okay, that's cool that you say that. Because the way I look at it, I guess I don't always express this to my clients, but I look at a predictor of success is the total elevation gain and these milestone challenges. So I'm glad you brought that up because not only do I feel like you're on a good trajectory or a client's on a good trajectory when they hit a milestone challenge, but I guess you do too. And so I'm glad you expressed it that way. So Alexis, I wrote to you at the end of week 4 because I knew that you were going on the European family bike trip. And this is what I said. I said, as of now, you've completed 10,187 total feet of elevation gain. Okay. By the 9th week, I'm pushing you to reach as close to 44,000 feet as possible. As I've mentioned, your age, base fitness, and the awesome Thompson guides will all help you reach the summit. But still, try to focus on your elevation gain, aiming for as close to 4,000 this week. Okay. So that would have included your milestone challenge. Mm-hmm. Your bike trip can be helped with your fitness, but you won't be able to accrue really any elevation gain by feet, by foot, really. Aim for 6,000 total feet in week 7 when you return. All that being said, we'll focus on 1 week at a time. And when you're on your trip, just enjoy it. So I kind of wanted to preempt, and get your mindset. Enjoy your trip. But when you come back, I want your mind to be ready to go. So folks, that's a perfect place to pause. Now in part 2, Hilary and Alexis take us through their final weeks of training, the big milestone challenges, and their reflections from the overall adventure. So be sure to follow the show in Spotify or Apple Music or whatever streaming service you use so that you know when part 2 is released. That concludes this episode of the Hike Strong podcast. I'm committed to keeping all of the episodes for free. All I ask is that you subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. And don't forget to share this podcast with your friends. My goal is to build a vast community of hikers with the confidence to crush any local or global trail. I hope you will join me in this endeavor. So until next time, train, hike, repeat, and as always, I'm here to support you every step of the way.